In this next segment, I'd like to introduce you to iTree Canopy. So a quick review on Canopy. If you recall, iTree Canopy is a tool which is used to estimate the amount of tree canopy cover and also some associated benefits within a defined area of interest. So Canopy can also be used to estimate other cover types too, such as impervious surfaces, such as roads and buildings, or cover types such as agricultural fields, water features, and grasslands. One thing, it is important to remember that the cover types that you are interested in surveying need to be visible and discernible on a Google Map image. And so that's also something else to consider too, that the quality of Google images can vary in many areas and they're frequently updated by Google. So like iTree Design, Canopy is a web-based tool. And you don't really need GIS expertise to use this tool. You can draw in your own boundary for an area of interest now in this latest version. And it does also provide a printable report which summarizes cover types and also some ecosystem services. And you can also do a canopy change assessment in conjunction with using Google Earth, but we're not going to go into that in this section. And there are some resources that actually explain that too, and I'll point those out to folks later on if you're interested in testing those features out too. So there are a couple things to keep in mind. Like iTree Design, this tool also requires an internet connection, and you do not need to install any other iTree software on your desktop. And newer web browsers tend to work best with this tool also, and as I mentioned, it is limited to working with Google imagery. So that's one of the frequent questions that we get from folks is, I have a really high quality image that I'd like to use. How can I import this into iTree Canopy to do a survey? And the simple answer is you can't. It's somewhat limited to a simple web-based application. It's not a GIS application. So having said that, you can certainly replicate what Canopy actually does in terms of the methodology and the techniques within a separate environment, such as your own GIS system. We won't go into that, but you can find the technical notes, and many people do that have their own imagery. But for simple use, we'll just stick with Google imagery for now. The reports that can be generated in Canopy are fairly bare bones, but they can be saved and emailed and so forth, or folks tend to use that data to create their own graphs and integrate that into some of their own more customized reports. So that's also an option to keep in mind too. It's going to provide you just with some very bare bones data, but you can certainly customize that to make that a more effective presentation if you're trying to present this to decision makers or to other members in your community. And another nice feature about Canopy is that you can also save your project and share that with other folks. So actually it is conceivable that you can work on this with multiple people. So if somebody begins a project and surveys 100 points, they can actually email it to one of their colleagues and they can continue on with that survey and so on. And although you don't need GIS experience to use Canopy, it certainly has that ability to use an Esri ArcGIS shapefile, which is a way that a boundary can be defined. And in some instances, if you were interested in looking at a very complex area, that might be something where you may want to try to work with some other partners in government or state or county or city or so forth to see if you can obtain a boundary shapefile, because it'll be very hard to replicate some of the more complex areas of interest depending on the boundaries. iTree Canopy is one of our most popular applications. It's used by many people, from municipal foresters to planners, urban forestry coordinators, and educators, school groups are interested in this. It's very accessible, simple to use, so volunteers and even neighborhood groups can use this at smaller scales. And we'll talk a little bit more about some ideas where it might be implemented on some of those smaller scales too. And also people that are coordinating or planning tree canopy initiatives or planting programs trying to increase canopy in their community, this is another nice tool that's really accessible and easy to use. So there are many communities or cities that have million tree type programs or so forth, or goals that they're trying to reach, and this is a great program that can help along that process. And also researchers. This tool evolved out of some of the research that Dr. Dave Nowak and Eric Greenfield conducted at the Northern Research Station, and really evolved from just the use of photo interpretation tools. And so with Google Images, it became more accessible to integrate some of the methods that the researchers use in photo interpretation to turn that into a functional tool that anybody can access and use. So again, iTree Canopy can be used by anyone who's really interested in assessing what their community tree canopy may be, or those who are interested in goal setting. And you can see an example here on the right where the Wisconsin DNR has done some fantastic work with iTree Canopy and has used that to assess about 19 different communities up in the Green Bay and Fox Valley region. So let's talk a little bit about strategies of how you can potentially use iTree Canopy in your community. And one of the best ways is just simply to start with establishing baseline data. You often hear mayors or administrators saying that we're trying to increase our canopy by 5%. Well, you need to know where you're at first before you can increase. So having a metric to start with to move forward is key. Oftentimes you'll hear that number 40% is the ideal canopy for an urban community, but that may or may not be practical for all communities. So it starts with determining baseline data, and then you can improve in your goal setting and have more attainable and realistic goals to move forward with. Another way that canopy can be used is by doing comparisons between, say, different neighborhoods or political wards, school districts, or even different communities. If I wanted to compare, say, the city of Oconomowoc with Delafield or Watertown, just to see how they compare. It's an easy tool to use for those types of applications. And one thing I do want to mention, such as in this example here, is that there is no easy way or a way that you can do one survey of many different smaller entities at the same time. You would essentially have to, in this particular case, if there's 7 wards, you would have to do 7 different surveys for each one of those wards. But it's very doable, and that's one of those things that can be facilitated by collaboration. Typically, to survey about 500 points may take about 3 hours or so. Another advantage to having information by neighborhood or school districts is that you then can look at differences between those areas, which may help you determine where are those areas that you might want to focus tree planting efforts or community outreach if you're trying to increase neighborhood or community canopy cover. So having that information at finer scales really can be to your advantage. Another interesting way in which iTree Canopy may be used is to monitor changes, such as the impacts of emerald ash borer. Now, a community forester might be able to tell us what the potential loss of ash trees along streets and in parks may be due to emerald ash borer moving through your town or your city, such as, say, 15 or 20%. But we often don't know about the overall impact of the urban forest, such as in Oak Creek, this woodlot here showing all the areas where ash is dying back that most folks probably will not see unless you are getting above ground, such as this picture that was provided by the Wisconsin DNR. So doing an iTree Canopy assessment will help in monitoring that change, documenting where you're at now. Although many communities have already lost many trees due to emerald ash borer or for other reasons, you can also still think about doing a historical assessment. So using a survey and then going back in time, say pre-emerald ash borer, to see what canopy was and what it is today. And that information could really be very important, especially when you consider how much trees may have been lost on private property that we really don't have a good grasp on. And finally, there are ways that information from iTree Canopy can be used in other applications, such as iTree View for doing some scenario modeling, or that canopy estimates can also be used in iTree Hydro if folks were interested in doing a hydro analysis in the future. So those are a little bit more advanced, and we won't be discussing those options in this particular segment, but perhaps sometime in the future we can tie them all together. In this next section, I'll just walk through a couple of the steps to set up an iTree Canopy project and conduct a canopy survey. I'm at the itreetools.org homepage at this moment here, and I'm going to select the Applications tab and then navigate down to iTree Canopy, which will take me over to the Canopy landing page. And a couple things about this page before we start proceeding to set up the project. There are some help features and some documents which you can access from this page. So if you ever get stuck on this as you're moving through working with Canopy in the future, always keep in mind that these little question marks are help features. So if you don't remember what exactly is an Esri shapefile, you can just click that icon there and it'll give you some information and sometimes link to guides which will help you in terms of acquiring this information or making sure that it is set up in proper coordinates. So help can be very user-friendly here if you have some problems in the future. And additionally, at the bottom, it discusses some of the methodologies and so forth. And if you were interested in that, you can certainly access that information and you can find out about all the background technical notes, how this tool was derived, some of the limitations, calculations that go into determining the estimates, and also the methodology that's used for determining pollution removal and assigning monetary value estimates. So you can access that information from several points within this screen and other screens such as the resources archive section 2, where most of the documentation for the iTree applications are stored. Okay, so this pretty much walks you through the steps that you need, and so we'll start with step 1. Load an Esri shapefile. So that is if you happen to have access to a GIS boundary shapefile, and that might be something that you may be working with a city or an other government agency to help you obtain that information, unless you have access to that within your own organization or you have those skill sets. And there are ways that you can actually do that with some freeware such as QGIS and some of the information that can be acquired online. We're just going to work with the simple option of defining a project area manually though. So this is something that was added into Canopy for folks that didn't have that technical expertise of working with a GIS system. So now we're at the area where we can define our project area of interest. So I will just enter in Oconomowoc, which is where I'd like to do my survey. The Google Map interface will then take you within that area, and you can use some of the map features to zoom in or pan to an area that you want to focus on. I'm just going to manually define an area for the sakes of demonstration. And you can see up here there is an icon that says Add Polygon. That's what we're going to use to define our area of interest. So I'll select the icon and then I will start to capture some of the main city area here. So once I connect the polygon, it then shows me that this is the area that I'm going to be surveying. And I'll select Finish. You'll then see the area of interest appear in the Google Map on the left panel. I'll now set up our survey in step 2. When you initially enter this screen, Canopy will provide 2 generic cover classes, tree and non-tree. You can certainly use these 2 classes as is, or you can edit these if you are interested in surveying other classes. So if you were only interested in trying to determine tree canopy for an area of interest, you could certainly work with this. But it may be of more value if you also had other classes that you define, such as impervious surfaces, agricultural fields, which might tell you a little bit more about the area of interest. One of the other things to keep in mind too as you're deciding on your cover classes is that once you start your survey, you can't really go back and change these and add in a new cover class if you forget one or if you want to change things in the future, because you're going to be generating random points in that area of interest. So adding in something new midstream isn't an option. So you want to put a little bit of thought into how you're going to define these moving into the future. And if you are potentially doing multiple projects, if you're going to share this or use or compare, say, your city or your town or neighborhood with other areas, you want to make sure that you're all using the same cover class scheme so that you can compare apples and apples, oranges and oranges to say. So this screen can be modified by selecting some of these icons at the bottom. So you can add a new field, you can edit an existing field, or you could delete a field altogether. So I'll go ahead and set up a couple cover classes that we can use for this demonstration. Okay, so I have my cover classes defined for this demonstration. One of the things I wanted to point out before proceeding is that we can save this cover class scheme that we just created. And this is a good idea, especially if you're going to be working with other folks who might be doing similar surveys. So this can save the steps of having to go through and recreate this again, I would just select save and then create a file name for this. And then I would have that cover class file. So the next time I were starting a new survey, I would then just select load and navigate to that file, and it would populate this cover class scheme in my new project, or if I wanted to send it to someone else. So that's something, if you're working with other master gardeners or other volunteers, you can save some of the work in the future once you go through this once. So we'll proceed. So after we've defined our cover classes, Canopy will then bring you to a screen where it needs some information to allow it to use county information to determine pollution estimates and carbon sequestration and carbon storage estimates, which are based on the county that you're working in. And if you're working in urban or rural areas, it makes a difference. So I'll select Waukesha County for Oconomowoc. I'll try to explain the options in this next section after we select our county. You have three options, all rural or urban. And what this is from is iTree Canopy uses the EPA's BenMap analysis program. That's short for Benefit Map Analysis. And that program is used for determining monetary values for pollution reduction. So the BenMap program is based on human health benefits due to a reduction in pollutant concentration. So the monetary value for pollution removal tends to be significantly higher in urban areas than in rural areas because more people will benefit from tree pollution removal because of the higher population density in urban areas. So in this case here, I'm just doing a small area within the city, but if I were doing, say, Waukesha County, which has a combination of rural and urban areas, I would then select all. And if you select all in a case like this, Canopy is just using a proportion of rural and urban areas in the county that you selected. So you'll see how these values change once I toggle through here down at the bottom. The next step is we have to tell Canopy which one of those cover classes are we considering to be tree canopy. Now in some cases, if you're doing somewhat of a more complex or sophisticated survey, you might have two. Say you might have tree or large shrub, or you might even have tree over impervious if you wanted to do a really refined survey to capture some more of the nuances of different cover classes in your area of interest. In my case, I'm only going to select tree because all my other ones aren't going to be applicable. And so what Canopy will do now is the percentage of cover that is obtained from tree will then be used to calculate benefits. And we can continue from here. So we're ready to start. So Canopy is, in its most basic sense, a random point generator. And so to generate a point, you select this plus icon here. It says new point. And it'll randomly pop a point within your area of interest. You then just move over to the cover classes, and these are the same classes that you defined, and you select the option that represents what you see in the screen. And so sometimes it's rather easy, but it can be difficult sometimes when you get to some of the shady areas. So it can be a little bit challenging as you move through this, and oftentimes you're trying to make your best determination. Sometimes just based on the shadows, it can be a little bit challenging to really be 100% certain what you're looking at. So I'll move through a couple points here just so we can populate this somewhat quickly. Okay, so we have 25 survey points created. Just wanted to point out a couple things here. One thing you'll notice is that it is determining an estimate as you're doing the survey. So you'll see this above here, and these are your cover class fields. That dot represents the current estimate. So it is 29.2% canopy after surveying 25 points, with an accuracy of the estimate of plus or minus 11. So as you continue on, you'll see that these bars tend to come closer to the point, which means that the accuracy of your estimate is getting tighter, it's increasing. And generally after 500 points or so, it'll be typically within 2, 3, depending on the area of interest. One of the other things that I did want to mention early too is this advice at the bottom to save your data. Save early, save often. That's probably one of the best things that you can keep in mind as you're first learning to work with this tool. Oftentimes you don't lose your data, but people tend to not understand where it's saving. So it's good to just do a couple points early on, save your data on your program, on your desktop somewhere or in a folder, and then try to navigate to it and open it back up. Make sure that you can start a project, save it from cradle to grave, and then you have the feel of it, and then you can go ahead and do more points. I tend to save my projects in batches, so I'll do 50 points and save it at 50, and then I'll add another 50 and save it at 100, and then I'll change it. And so I have different file names sometimes too. You can do it however you like, but try to develop a system to have some redundancy so that you do not want to run through and spend 3 hours on something and find out that you aren't quite sure where you saved it, or if you accidentally overwrote one of your files inadvertently. So at the top you have the option here too. Again, you can access the technical notes and the methodology information. You can look at a report, so we'll do that, see what it looks like after 26 points. And so it's just an expansion of what we were seeing on that main survey screen. So here's our percent covers. It's a little bit more legible, along with the cover classes that we created, and also the estimates of tree benefits so far. So you can print this out if you want to keep a copy at this point, or we can go back and continue on with the survey. You also have the option to export out those points as a CSV file, so if you wanted to save those points, you can use them if you have the skills to import them into a GIS system, or if you just want them for your own records, you can save those points. The start over option does just that. It resets everything, so be careful there. And then we can exit out of the application if so desired.